Very happy to welcome everyone to this special event of the Democracy Center and Democracy Week, of course, as you all know. I'm especially thrilled to welcome our two guests, and thank you for your patience. I will introduce them both, and then we'll go on to the screening of the video, 1001 Martian Nights. Then we'll have a discussion, or I'll have a discussion with Tintin and Karen afterwards, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So let me just introduce our wonderful guests, and I'm so thrilled to have you here. Tintin Wulia, who made the video 1001 Martian Nights that we'll be watching and discussing today, was initially trained as a musician, a film composer, and an architectural engineer in the US and Indonesia. She works with a range of media, including video, installations, telematics, drawing, painting, dance, text, performance, and public interventions, and often engages the audience as participants in her work. Much of her work as an artist researcher during the last 2 decades has focused on the complexities of borders in the globalizing world. But also in her work, she's returned again and again to the mass killings of 1965 and 1966 and the history of violence in Indonesia, but also significantly beyond Indonesia. Tintin and I first met in 2008 at the University of Amsterdam at a workshop called Indonesia 10 Years After. And that, of course, is 10 years after the downfall of the brutal and end to the brutal Suharto regime, where in that context in Amsterdam, she spoke about her project, the Great Wallpaper Series, which is a set of incredibly impressive and exquisitely rendered watercolor murals of her family's legal documents as Chinese Indonesians. And it's really an amazing project, and it's what first introduced me to her work, and I've been following it since with incredible interest and enthusiasm. So Tintin's work has been shown at major international exhibitions, including the 57th Venice Biennale, where she represented Indonesia with a solo pavilion focused on atrocity and secrecy, which will obviously come up today as well. Currently, Tintin is the principal investigator for the Swedish Research Council artistic research project called Protocols of Killing, 1965, Distance, and the Ethics of Future Warfare, which will, a project that will continue through 2023. I am incredibly excited that she could join us today from no less than Brisbane, Australia, for a conversation focused on her work and on the video that we'll soon be screening, 1001 Martian Nights, which premiered in 2017 at the Venice Biennale. Our second guest, Karen Strassler, is professor of anthropology at CUNY's, that is City University of New York's Queens College, and at CUNY's Graduate Center. Her research interests include photography, visual and media culture, violence, and historical memory, among others. She's the author of the prize-winning book, Refracted Visions, Popular Photography and National Modernity in Java, which came out in 2010 with Duke University Press. And from just last year, another book, groundbreaking book like the first one, on the political work of images in post-authoritarian Indonesia. And that book is called Demanding Images, Democracy, Mediation, and the Image Event in Indonesia, and it's also a Duke publication. Karen and I have been fellow travelers for many years due to our shared interests in questions of visuality, images, violence, and memory, not to mention Indonesia. It is an enormous pleasure to welcome these two fabulous women, and I'm especially grateful to both of them for accommodating this event. Also because Karen is basically up at the crack of dawn in Brooklyn. And by the time our conversation and the screening and Q&A are over, it will be very close to Tintin's bedtime. So strange world, but so lovely to see both of you. So I think we're ready for the screening of the video. And then I look much forward to having basically a three-way conversation with both of you and then with you in the audience. So thank you. and thank all of you for coming. Great. There you are, both of you. That was pretty amazing, and there's a lot to talk about. So I should say that Tintin and Karen had a conversation after a screening of this video last spring. And Karen gave an excellent kind of short introduction to some of the material and events that are obliquely, in different ways, referenced, obliquely, directly. And so I've asked Karen to actually do that for us today. So thanks, Karen. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Sound is all right? Great. Well, thank you, Patricia, for inviting me. And Tintin, it's always great to see you and happy to be together again in a conversation about this incredible piece. So I wanted to just provide some historical context for people who maybe don't know all that much about the events that happened in Indonesia. We just passed the 56th anniversary of the events that that set off what the film is about, and so I thought it'd be helpful to provide that background for some people who may not know it. So in October 1965, after years of escalating tensions between right-wing forces led by the Indonesian military and left-wing forces, particularly led by the Indonesian Communist Party, which was a tremendously powerful party. It was the third largest party, communist party in the world at the time. And of course, it was a completely legal party, right, which overnight became illegal and dangerous to have had any affiliation with. What happened was that there was an alleged coup attempt that became a pretext for the military to take power, led by General Suharto. And blame for this coup attempt was cast on the Communist Party, and the army rounded up, imprisoned and killed Communist Party members, leftists, and those associated with the party or alleged to be sympathizers. Throughout the country, they did this with the assistance of members of civil society, of religious groups, and other groups that were sort of conscripted into this effort. And it's estimated that about 500,000 to 1 million people were killed, mostly between the years of 1965 and 66. And the recent release of US state documents has confirmed what I think everyone already knew, which is the extent to which the US supported the military takeover and was complicit in the killings, and certainly very complicit in the sort of covering up or the lack of outrage response to them. And of course, this is a brilliant intervention of this film, is to draw very explicitly that connection between US imperial Cold War politics and the global context of the Cold War and the events that happened in Indonesia. Now, in addition to those who were killed, hundreds of thousands of people were imprisoned, and without trial, without being formally charged with a crime. And about 12,000 men, among those hundreds of thousands, were sent to a notorious prison camp on Buru Island. And Buru Island camp is best known perhaps for being the place where Pemudia Anantatur wrote or composed orally his series of books about the Indonesian nationalist revolution, a nationalist awakening. He composed those while he was imprisoned there. And the prisoners were referred to by the government as settlers. They were forced to do just horrific hard labor, clearing the jungle, building their own barracks, building the camp roads. So they essentially were creating their own prison, and also and sort of being framed as kind of terraformers, right? As Tintin draws out in her film. And when they were eventually freed, sometimes after more than a decade of imprisonment, they needed to be treated as ex-prisoners and as pariahs. And they were called extapol, right, which is ET. So of course, this connection again with the alien, the extraterrestrial, and the former prisoner. It's important to note that the families of those who were killed and imprisoned were also stigmatized. They were marked as unclean by the government and subject to various restrictions, and treated with suspicion and contempt often by their fellow citizens. And again, this is part of that context of the film of the idea that this was not just individuals who were persecuted, but whole families who were affected. And the generational passing on of secrets and fear is very much part of this story. And finally, in 1001 Martian Nights, there's mention of a film that a mother does not want her son to see. And this is a reference to the notorious film, which was made in 1984, sponsored by the government in a very sort of documentary style, but also a very sort of overwrought melodramatic style that violently and vividly depicted the supposed events of 1965 from the perspective of the government, and painted communists as treacherous monsters. So all school children were forced to watch this obligatory film. It also aired on TV every year until 1998, until the end of the dictatorship. And so in some ways, any film that's made about 1965 is a response to that film. And I think that's why it was so important to mention it in what Tintin was in. So I'll just stop there. There's so much more to say, and let Tintin maybe take off.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Tintin, do you want to say something to start us off, or should I start the conversation? What would you like? Yeah? All right. So it's an amazing film, and I think, you know, what Karen said helps to situate it in different ways. I'm sure for some of you who are less familiar with this brutal history. But I guess then I'd like to start off, Tintin, with asking you about the title. So, I mean, there's many things I'm sure that you can say about the title, but perhaps we can start first with the reference to 1001 Nights, which comes up is mentioned in different ways by people in the film. 1001 criminals, 1001 stories. And for me, but I could be totally wrong, I thought of 1001 Nights and, you know, the Arabian Nights, which is what it's usually known as in English, which is this story, multiple stories of a woman who defers her execution night after night, 1001 nights, to prevent being killed, right? And just kind of seduces this evil ruler with these stories. So I wonder if that has anything there, or you were talking about something else. And then, of course, we'll get to Mars, as it were.
Yes, thanks, Patsy. And thank you, Karen, for that really clear and brief introduction to the context as well. Well, I guess, Patricia, the title 1001 Martian Nights, you were right that it's a collection of stories. This is how I see it, at least, a collection of stories of survival, basically, and that's the connection to the Arabian Nights as well. But you know, it's quite interesting because even though I've talked about it and I've seen it, I've thought about it during the making as this collection of stories after stories about survival. And oh yeah, and also when we talk about the film, it's actually a video, part of a video installation that's looping, so it's never ending as well. In the installation. So yeah, but then to go back to the beginning, to the context of making as well. This was made for the Indonesian pavilion in the Venice Biennial, and I would say that you know not all, even though it was really clear to me in certain ways, not all of the concepts and my plans were made clear in the beginning as well. So in the beginning of the process, and so I was also you know, like what do you call that, like negotiating quite a lot during the process. Partly also, you know, like working with the actors who are survivors of the killings, and partly that, but you know, like there is just so much that goes into the making that until it was shown, I was still calling it 1001 Martian Homes, which was also the title of the solo exhibition, which has 2 other works. But then, you know, like more and more, I'm getting more familiar, like, you know, not familiar, more comfortable, I guess, with calling it 1001 Martian Nights, and people started calling it 1001 Martian Nights as well, and so the title actually changed. But yes, yeah, practically it is stories, a collection of stories of survival, and it's part of an installation. And I can talk about the installation later as well. And as I said, that, you know, like it was like, you know, like the process is like a cloud for me. It's like, you know, like going around in a cloud and trying to like make clarify things. But that's also how I work generally with art. It's, you know, like navigating these clouds of affects basically, and try to organize them. It's like, you know, like the surrealist artists, they do automatic writing. And so a lot of the process was like that. Although this is also writing with other people, right? Because the survivors who became actors in this work, they also write. And I read their texts, and Teja Bayu, the late Teja Bayu, was actually in the process of preparing his manuscript. The book is out, by the way. So yeah, if you're interested, it's out. And so I took a peek in the book, into the book as well. And of course, there are lots of other stories as well that he told me. And Hersri, I've been reading Hersri's book, but then during the process, I was rereading them again and realized that, oh, this is Hersri Setiawan, who is a survivor and was a prisoner in Buru as well, Buru Island as well. And I realized that in his writings, he wrote a lot, like, you know, the phrase 1001 is very much there. So, you know, like when he says, you know, there are 1001 what do you call that, guards, but then the 1001 criminals would have 1001 ideas to, you know, to what do you call that, the situation. And so that's actually sort of taken from his book as well. So but, you know, like I just sort of emphasize the 1001 there as well. So yeah, so that's well how it was made and what led to the title as well. And yeah, I guess I can stop there.
No, great. Thank you, Tintin. And I think what comes through is, yeah, the stories as survival, but also the writing. I mean, all these notebooks that come back again and again, and the description of these precious plastic bags left over from bread, I guess, that are then buried under banana trees because one of the prisoners happens to be a botanist and knows that the earth around banana trees, I guess they suck up a lot of water, is super dry, and so it's a good place to preserve. So that's also survival of the writings, of the words, of what keeps them, you know, like the index that's recited over and over again. It's like, then I know whether, as one former prisoner says, then I know whether I'm actually crazy or not yet crazy. So can you also say something about Mars? Because I think there's a way, I actually work in that part of Indonesia, as you know, and so that, dare I say, for at least quite a number of Indonesians is kind of far out there. And the island of Buru, even in the Moluccas, because of the prisoners who were there and the history, is itself out of the way in Maluku itself, in the Moluccan Islands. But there's all the space age stuff and other things going on. So could you please talk about Mars and Martians? Because Martians comes up, you know, children of Martians and third generation Martians. Perhaps you could talk about that part of the title.
Yes, yeah. Of course, it has something to do with being alienated as well. And also, maybe I can also share something from the making here. So there was this part in the video where Hersri Setiawan was reciting how he and all the other prisoners had to terraform, basically work on the land, and how the earth is really different. And I mean, the soil is really different. And you know, so when we were going, when we were undergoing the process of shootings, I would talk about the stories with them, and then, you know, like would rehearse, you know, placing it in Mars. And generally, you know, like Hersri, Tejabayu, all the actors were really, you know, like it's something, you know, something different than, you know, like to try to remember it, but then place it in another place. And so but at one point, Hersri, this was sort of improvised. We talked about it, but it was not written. And he said, well, the soil of Mars is really different from the soil of Java. And I was struck there as well, like, oh, wow, okay, so it is actually quite true as well. And, you know, like the distance, this, you know, like, it just, that sentence just really embodies everything, basically, for me. But why Mars? As I mentioned, you know, the process of making the whole thing was like a cloud for me, and it was like navigating things between, you know, things that were not really clear, but I had to reorganize anyway. And so, I am actually quite, what do you call that? Like quite familiar with Mars, maybe, because I grew up in the 70s. And, you know, during the time of the space race, you know, we would see, you know, like rockets being launched and this kind of thing. And I noticed that more and more now, it's you know, it's being really popular again. You know, like this space race. But I was I was born actually 7 years after NASA successfully did their first flyby of Mars. So they didn't land, but they flew by in Mars, and that was successful. And I was born 7 years later, and that was also 7 years after my grandpa was taken away during the Indonesian mass killings of 1965-66. And so so you know, so all these facts just came together, and yeah, so I guess that's what I can say now. Maybe I'll come back to it later again.
So I want to bring Karen in a minute, but I wonder if you could talk about also the emphasis on the future, like why is everything displaced, not only on Mars, but sort of away from the present? And I guess there's another aspect, just the focus on or the attunement to time in the film. I mean, as Karen also brought out, this kind of intergenerational dynamic, which is your own dynamic, if that's not the right word, but your own history. And, you know, these children and children of children. And I was struck by Ken Setiawan, who's one of the children in the film, who on her birthday received a bunch of recipes, including several from her father, Hesri Setiawan, who was a prisoner on Buru, for making, you know, head soup and things like that, because it was so watery that you could see the reflection of your own head in it. So, and she says, I never made these recipes, but my daughter asked me about them, so maybe I will. So there's this sense of forward, generational, future. Perhaps you can talk about that, and then I really want to bring in Karen as well. Thanks.
Yes. So I mentioned distance earlier. I think that's I guess where that's the core of the thinking of going to the future. So it's not only Mars, which is, you know, like at the distance away from us as well, but also something way, you know, like 2 centuries in the future. And in it also there is this feeling, I guess, of a never-endingness. You know, the fact that the installation is also, the video is also looping, and the distance between. Oh yeah, I mentioned that it was a video installation, and this is actually a telematic video installation. So pairing with the ones in Venice are also works in Jakarta. So there are twin pavilions, one in Venice and one in Jakarta, and both are connected, and they're showing things simultaneously, basically. And you can see your peer audience in Jakarta if you're in Venice, and vice versa. So distance also goes is in that setting somehow, and I think for me it has to do with secret, and it has to do with public secret. This is, you know, like it's secret. So when I was growing up, one of the first childhood stories that I heard from my father was that his grandfather was taken away in 65. We don't know where he is, but maybe he's dead. Maybe he's still alive. We don't know. But this is a secret. You can't tell anyone. And so I kept that secret until I was an adult, and then realized that it was actually public secret. And you know, so the public secret, it's like that. It's living in that kind of condition was like, you know, sort of living there, but not really there. It's so there is a distance somehow. You know, like the secrets are very familiar. It's very close. It's very tangible, but then at the same time, it's not there. So I guess that's what translates into, you know, the settings of the making of this work as well, and that's what came out in the work.
Great. Yeah, I think that comes through very clearly, right? These secrets and not knowing and distance and what is this and things that come up in fragments and traces and so on. I know you you set up with Ken Setiawan, who's in the film, something that grew into a collective of people, including Karen, called 1965 Every Day, 65 Setiap Hari. And I wonder if, I don't know who would like to talk about it first. I know, Karen, you contributed to it. And I don't know if you want to start or Tintin wants to start about the project, which...
Go ahead, Tintin. Why don't you say what it is, and then I'll.
Okay. Well, yeah. You mentioned earlier, Patricia, about the inheritance of stories, and that's the inheritance of the recipe in this case, from Ken to her daughter. But that's one of the things that made us start this initiative. Basically, it's called 1965 Setiap Hari, and we collect stories and disseminate them through social media in different channels. So now we have podcasts as well, but we started with a blog, and then we started disseminating the stories that we collected in that blog through Facebook, and then we started an Instagram, and I think in 2017 or something, and then yeah, but the newest addition to it is a podcast. But in doing this also, like Ken and I started it, but then soon we grew into a collective, and now there are 10 people in the collective, and we rely on contributors like Karen, actually, who did contribute really meaningful stories for us back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Well, I think, just to kind of return to some of the themes that have already come up. I mean, this question of, I thought what you said, Tintin, about this sort of cloud of affect and this sort of swirl of things that are somehow connected, but you haven't worked out how they're connected. And part of the work that you do in making the film is sort of finding a structure for them and presenting them in some kind of a way that makes sense, but can't ever fully make sense, right? Continues to be a little bit sort of impressionistic and full of gaps, and you make very clear the work of putting these things together as opposed to kind of some sort of smooth narrative. And I think that really speaks very well, not just to your own personal process, but to the way that memories of 1965 kind of exist in Indonesian society today, and even today, right? Even after, so many years, and after after the end of the dictatorship, which was supposed to initiate this great opening, and it did. I mean, things became speakable in a way that they hadn't been, but they also very fragmented. What we know is fragmented. What people are willing to say is circumscribed and dangerous. There's still a lot of fear. And there are habits, right, that you, I think, have embodied in your own life, of habits of secrecy, habits of fear that are very hard to just throw off, right? They're part of not just making you, but making whole generations of people, right? And so when I did my first field work in Indonesia for my dissertation, which was between 1998 and 2000. So it was right at this moment at the end of the dictatorship when everything was sort of opening up. But what I found was that stories of 1965, and I wasn't looking for them, I wasn't seeking them out, would just kind of drop into little interactions and little conversations in the most circumscribed and fleeting kinds of ways. Someone would just sort of drop something and let it sit there in the air almost between us, and it felt very sensitive, and I felt very aware of not pushing and not probing when I could feel people's fear. And so the 1965 Everyday Project, when Tintin and Ken invited me to participate, I was so amazed by that invitation, because I don't think of myself as someone who works on 1965 or particularly has, of course, any direct personal experience. But what I did was I went back through my field notes and I looked for those little fragments that I had jotted down. And I tried to juxtapose them with photographs that I had taken during my fieldwork, which were also fragments, right? Photographs are also fragments, and they don't tell a story. They suggest a possible story, but they leave you, unfulfilled in a certain way. But also imagining, right? You have to reconstruct a story around them. And so I think that's what's, really evocative in the film, and, where you get pieces of stories, but you don't get complete stories, right? And you do so much work of creativity and imagining, that I think is sort of a necessary part of memory work in this kind of context. And I also think one of the brilliant things about 1965 Every Day is that what you've done in using these different platforms is really, and I think it's a hallmark of your work in general, is being so attentive to form, right? So I found that I was creating posts really mainly for the Instagram. I mean, that's what I was thinking about, Instagram and Facebook. So it was just a picture and a very brief quote from my field notes. And it's a very compressed form. It's very economical. There's only so much you can say in it. And yet I think it speaks again very well to that sense of the fragment and the possible story that you have to kind of fill in. And of course, you also are using these platforms to create this multivocal history that is made up of fragments coming from many different sources. So I think it's a really exciting project.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I can give you the Instagram link. I just want to end with maybe a question about form, since Karen raised it, and it's something I've been thinking about after watching the video a few times. And then we'll open it up. You've been very patient. The fragment and all that, and these bits of stories and memories, and then these structures like the index that goes through it in different ways. But also, one of the things that's interesting about the film, I find, also thinking about other works, other productions around 65 that have come out, often, early, like in 2000, right after the end of the dictatorship, but then also more recently, struggle with form. That is to say, Tintin, people do not, or many of these productions do not turn to documentary. There are various reasons for that, but I think it's not so much, I don't want to do documentary, but it's like, I'm not quite sure how to grapple with form. So you use science fiction. I'm thinking of the film by the US director Joshua Oppenheimer, which might be familiar, The Act of Killing, where there's a theater piece at the center, theater piece acted by some of the henchmen who were involved in the killings in Medan, a city in North Sumatra. There is Garanugroho's quite wonderful little film called Poetry Cannot Be Buried, in which there's a recreation of a prison and prisoners, and the rhythm of the film is people being taken away to be executed again and again, and then the end of the film ends with poetry. Color, it's a black and white film, color seeps in, and a group of men sitting in a circle use their prayer pillows as drums for rhythm, and recite poetry and sing. So I guess what can you say about this? I wouldn't say avoidance of documentary, but perhaps search for a form that one might be able to address, that's evoke these horrific and the word indescribable is often used, but it's I never find that a satisfactory word. But anyway, I wonder if you could reflect on that, Tintin.
Yes, I guess I can go back first to the medium. Film, as Karen in her introduction said as well, and it's also referred to in the work, in this video work, is a tool for the New Order government to sort of well, it's a propaganda tool to say it directly, and so I have been for some time feeling not too comfortable with the medium of film, and I actually when I started making works, I started making small videos, and a few years later, I started being called a filmmaker, because also mainly those works would go into film festivals. And so, and that made me very uncomfortable. And I started, and that's where I started to expand basically with my medium, and started working with installation and performances, and just to not be, you know, limited by that medium. And also early on, really early on, in 2002, for example, I started this initiative. It was a short film organization. It's still running now, but I'm not involved anymore. But it's called Minikino, and it's a short film organization focusing on screening and discussion, and using the short film format as a sort of object to stimulate discussions. And so basically, when I see it now, it was also, you know, like trying to open up this medium, basically, to not, you know, to not be affixed in it, and you know, sort of be complicit in, you know, in not in stopping dialogues, for example. And so that's what I can say about the medium, and that's why part of my attempt here in making this work was actually to open up those spaces, basically. And so the telematic installation, the video, are connected between Venice and Jakarta, and it's connected not only through the fact that they're screened simultaneously, but maybe you've noticed some dark spots, just black screen spots on the video when you're watching it. So they are actually, they would cut to a live stream of the screening room in the other setting. And so you see from the back. So basically, I can maybe Michelle, can you kindly share the slides again? I can show you the setting if we show these slides again. But basically, so there is so we see the film in front, like you do now. So you see the screen in front of you, but from the back, there is a surveillance camera that transmit live stream, basically, and it will the film would cut to that live stream. So that's how the setting is. And sometimes, so you would see firstly your back, and then it would cut to the back of people who are watching in Jakarta. And so and I've received comments about this, that, you know, that it makes the viewers realize, oh, we're actually inside something, and there is something else. There is, you know, another space that's parallel to this one. So I don't know if I can play this.
So I think they're trying to look for that, but in the meantime, I'm a little concerned about time also, because I'm sure there are questions. So let's see if Michelle can call it up. And in the meantime, if it's okay with you, I'll open the floor screen for questions from people. I'm not sure what's going on with Michelle. Do you have?
It doesn't seem to work. We can get it online, but we can't get it on the.
Okay, I'm sorry. Apparently they can get it online, but not on the screen. But I think you gave a pretty good description. So maybe we should open the floor. I'm sorry about that. So questions, people. Yeah, Anne? There's, oops, or someone with another mic.
So she can hear me. Oh, sorry.
And maybe please introduce yourself first.
Yeah, hi, Anna Leander. I'm from the Political Science, IR and Political Science Department here. Thanks a lot for the wonderful film and for a super interesting discussion. So just picking up on something, I love this idea of organizing effective clouds, as you put it. And when Karen was talking, she introduced the idea of memory work. And you've also, in the film, now you ended up talking about the unease with film and images. And it's very strong also in the film itself. There's a lot of reflection on images. But you also very clearly work with an idea of embodied memory through, you present yourself playing the piano. There's the idea of touch, smell, taste, etc. And also embedded in the structures that you're creating. It's absolutely beautiful. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you see that memory work and how you see your film and work in it actually intervening with the memory work around 1965. I'd be really curious, how does it help us actually to organize clouds?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. We also talked a little bit about public secret. And what I found about public secret is that, even when, it's so big, it's as big as an elephant, you don't see it and you feel that it's a secret and the fear is always there. I guess what can the line that I can draw, the thread that I can draw from between many of my works, including the initiative that I started with Ken, for example, is sort of to bring people together around a certain object. An object, object here is something that we act and interact with. And through that object, and and this can be a common object, I don't know, a certain kind of food or something. We sort of together reorganize our views, our memories, our opinions, and to reach a certain common understanding. So that's how I see this working, and I think every one of us has fragments of memories, and it's really important to bring those together. Not only because then we can understand perhaps more and have a larger picture of it, but also that process of just reorganizing it together is I think is really important, because then we arrive at a certain point, but then we depart with something else. So yeah, I think that's what I can say now. So yeah, if maybe Karen has a comment to that as well. I mean, I'm so touched that that you were able to contribute to the 1965 Setiap Hari, and it's it is also something, like you mentioned that you don't have anything to do with 65. You don't see yourself as someone who works with 65, but it's just you work with Indonesia, and it's just so pervasive in all aspects of society, I think, and that's 65 Setiap Hari is also opening up these new spaces. So yeah.
Just briefly, because I know that we want to hear from other people, I'll just say that I think what you said before about changing film from something that shuts down discussion, right? And that is about presenting a kind of authoritative narrative, to making film or any artwork as an object that gathers people into a common space of discussion. and the formal ways that you make that film are all about sort of disrupting a kind of clean and finished narrative. And so I think you set the stage for that kind of memory work that is so essential.
Great. No, thank you. So more questions also for Karen, obviously, Tintin and Karen. Yeah, in the back, sorry. Everyone's masked, so.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm Christine Lutringer from the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy, and it's a pleasure to meet you after our exchanges. So, and also very, very interesting to have the film screening and the debate organized in the context of our Democracy Week, which is precisely this year on the theme of democracy in transition. So we were very interested in having your views about how researchers, image makers also contribute to make the transition towards a more aware and a more active also citizenry. So I wanted to ask you, Tintin, in particular, how you see your role as also political, and to what extent is it a difficult role to have, and how was the film and the other works that you have been doing received in Indonesia? Thank you.
I would refer to the public secret. And yes, there is this sort of, to borrow a colleague's, a friend's term, covert imaginary about 65, 66 mass killings. But to think about how big a scale it was, I don't think anyone actually did not know about it. My generation might be different because I was told by my father, so it was one of my sort of character shaping story when I was little. But a lot of us wasn't told, I guess, by our parents. But I think I talked about the clouds of affects. It's always there, and so there is some kind of an understanding, I feel that if I want to change something, I need to sort of negotiate spaces so that I can actually make a discussion or a conversation happen. So instead of trying to provoke, I try to work with this, different consciousness and different opinions, and try to really bring them together. My attempt to do that is sort of repetitive. I continue to do that, trying to do that from different angles, with different mediums, with different kinds of works. And so yeah, so that's the continuous what do you call that, work that I have to do, I guess. 1965 Setiap Hari is also one of them. So I hope that clarifies something. I'm not sure, but yeah. But thank you so much for your question, Catherine, and it's really Christine, and it's really nice to have you as well.
Other questions? Yeah, Riddhi.
Oh, thank you. Hi, thank you so much. I'm Riddhi. I'm a second year PhD student at the Department of Anthropology and Sociology. And my sort of research is also connected to prisons in India. So one of the things I'm interested in is actually creative ways in which incarcerated persons sort of document or talk about their experiences of incarceration. And the film was just really fabulous. I think the way it's pretty inspiring for me. I'll probably have to rewatch it again, to be honest, to completely grasp the things it's trying to do. But one of my questions is, and what sort of struck me was this there were certain visuals which were constantly sort of, like about making and unmaking and building and, like dismantling. Can you say a bit more as to what they represent here? Because they're very striking. They are not symbolizing what people are talking about. So the process of making life inside the Buru Island prison setup, that's not what they're showing. But then they're doing something else, and I'm very curious to hear, how and why you sort of chose to put them there. Thank you.
Riddhi, I would actually ask that question back to you. What for you? What did they? Can I ask that?
So what did you think you were looking at, or what did you think these?
I don't know. I mean, that's what they were there. You could see there were these. Thank you. There were these. Like you started off with the map of that structure, like some digital thing, and then there was this whole the physical aspect of it, which emerges. I don't know. I mean, and that's why, like, I was very puzzled as to, like, why? What do you like? Why did you choose those of the many other things that you could perhaps put in the background while people were talking? And that was sort of my question. I'm sorry, I really don't have an answer myself. I'll really have to think about it.
I like what you said about making and unmaking. I think I'll start there. And yes, those are image of making and some unmaking as well. For me, it has to do with the unfinished constellations of things. I think that the piece itself is actually never ending. The stories are never ending as well in the larger context. And I guess that's also something to do with the future as well, thinking that it might be never ending. I think that's what I can share at this point. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I would love to hear more from you all. Actually, what this means to you.
So thank you for that. I think there may be a class in here very soon. Someone's pointing at something.
One question, little question.
Short question.
Good afternoon. I am Mario Grangeia. I am a visiting fellow in the Hirschman Center on Democracy, and I am Brazilian. I am just curious about the idea that you told that your grandfather was also one of the victims. I only want to ask if you intended to mention that in the movie and you did not do it, and you changed up the idea or not, because I think this information is so relevant. I have once also made a research project based in family history, a grandfather also, and I think it's something that you want to explicit some. It's very related to the object of the movie. Why did you not appoint that in the movie?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I sort of wanted to dedicate these people, so I see my role in the film as sort of facilitating it, and that's why the music, the background music, I was involved in that, and I was involved in the making of it, the back scene of it, and you see that as well. And for me, with this one, for me, it's not really important for people to know that my grandfather was taken away. I do have other works that mention this. So I guess, like, it's also Yeah, I mean, I think the work stands by itself as a dedication to all these people, all the actors who, you know, were willing to share their stories, even, you know, like in midst of fear as well. Not all of them are fearful. Some of them, Hersi and Tejabayi, for example, have written about it, and a big, you know, well, they talk a lot about it publicly. So, but some of them wanted to be very, you know, subtle about it. So yeah. So that's the question to my grandfather, the context of my grandfather, I think.
Thank you, Tintin. I think that's a wonderful note on which to conclude, actually, for whom you certainly had in mind when you were making this, and who worked with you very closely to make this video and the installation. I would like to conclude also by thanking the Albert Hirschman Center for Democracy, and especially Christine Lutringer for her enormous support and energy and enthusiasm. I also want to conclude by thanking, of course, Tintin for sharing the incredible video and for telling us about it, and for Karen for contributing for setting off the discussion with, and also for really bringing in some of your own work and thoughts on this really complicated memory work, brutal history, ongoing, unfinished business of Indonesia and its history. And I want to conclude also by saying that both Tintin and Karen are key interlocutors in a project that I share with a number of people here, called, funded by the Swiss National Foundation, I shouldn't forget that, that's key, called Images, Invisibilities, and Work on Appearance in Indonesia. And therefore, happily, I very much hope that we can bring Tintin and Karen live to Geneva at some point to continue more discussions. Thank you so much for staying up past your bedtime and getting up at the crack of dawn. And I'll see you guys on Friday. So terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.